Welcome to this edition of Cross Culture with Bola. If you're new to this channel, please kindly hit the subscribe button and be a part of this conversation about cross-cultural issues. I had a conversation with a friend sometime this week. We were talking about the topic of adoption, and I was quite surprised about the way the conversation went, because it appeared that my friend believed that there is something Western about adoption, that adoption is not something that Africans do, that adoption is not exactly cultural for people in other cultures, and it happens only in the Western world. And it really got me thinking. I began to think about what she said, and I began to look back into my life and look around me to see whether what she said was true or not. And it actually brought to my mind the story of one of my friends, one of the people I went to school with, who was adopted but didn't know he was adopted. His story was that he was adopted as a baby, and he was brought up like he was just the biological child of the adoptive parents, and he never knew anything. He went to elementary school, went to high school, went to college, didn't know anything until some flippant aunt said something that got him curious and got him thinking. So he began to dig, he began to ask questions, and finally got to realize that he was adopted. His reaction shocked me because, in my own happy-go-lucky way, I thought his adoptive parents did a pretty good job, that they brought him up just like their child. But he felt deceived. He didn't like the fact that he wasn't told about his identity. And it was at that point that I realized that the African culture is not big on adoption. And the reason is very simple. We're very communal in Africa. You have cousins that you don't even know how you were related. Everybody related to everybody. Anybody who grew up in your house, came visiting and never left, is your cousin, is your aunt, is your uncle. You've lived together for so many years. We're family. We don't even bother to dig into what the bloodline was. Ancestry.com is not African, okay? It's just what it is. So I was quite surprised that my friend took it very badly, but thankfully, finally, he settled and realized that, okay, his parents did the best they knew how to do with what they had. But then I began to look into scriptures too, because in the Western world, it's big. A child knows he or she is adoption. Most of them. It's not something they're secretive about. It's something everybody knows. You see a black couple adopt a white child, a white couple adopt a black child, Asian child, and all that. And the kids know, I was adopted, and it's not a big deal. The African country is the African continent is slightly different. We're very touchy about things like that. So I began to look in scriptures to find out, what does the Bible say about adoption? Is adoption Western? Is it African? Is it even scriptural? Thankfully, I found out that the Bible is full of stories about adoption. In fact, every single one of us was adopted into the family of God. We are all adopted children. The Bible actually says that He adopted us, and so we can call Abba Father. So adoption is not foreign to God, it's not unscriptural, it's very, very biblical. It's not a big deal to God at all. Moses was adopted, remember? Moses was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses grew up. The Bible says in Exodus chapter 2 that Pharaoh's daughter paid Moses' biological mother to bring him up. And when Moses grew, the mother took him back to Pharaoh's daughter. So he grew up in Pharaoh's palace. He was adopted. And it was open. Everybody knew. That's why when he went to the Israelites and he was trying to separate a fight, they were like, hey, who do you think you are? And I began to look in scriptures and I found out that that wasn't the only story of adoption. Remember Abraham? Yeah. When God called him, he took his nephew Lot with him. He adopted his nephew. He took him with him everywhere he went. And Lot knew Abraham was his uncle. And then I looked at the story of Esther. The Bible says in Esther chapter 2 that Esther's father and mom died. So Esther was an orphan, and her uncle Mordecai adopted her and brought her up just like she was his biological child. Adoption is very scriptural. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And I think if we look at it very deeply, the African culture that kind of dictates or implies that we don't tell kids their adoption is really unscriptural. Because now we're lying to the child. It's a betrayal of trust. Don't get me wrong, I understand why adoptive parents do what they do. They don't want to create a difference between their biological children and their adopted children and all that. I get all that. I get the culture. I get the reasoning behind it. But let's step back for a second and look at it from the perspective of the child that was adopted, who in some form have lived a lie all his or her life, thinking this is my biological mom, this is my biological dad. Imagine the confusion. Imagine the disappointment the kid has when after 28 years, 30 years, the child gets to know, oh, this wasn't my mom. My biological mom is somewhere. And the child has questions. Or maybe there is a medical problem. Because I know a case like that where there was a medical problem and the biological parents couldn't donate blood because they were not related by blood. And that was when the whole thing came out. So, like we said on this show, every culture is self-validating and there are problems in every culture. The culture that says don't tell an adoptive child that the child was adopted is not scriptural. God told us that we were adopted. The Bible says that we were all adopted into the family of God. Esther knew she was adopted. It was written down out there in the Bible. Moses knew he was adopted. So why aren't you telling your adopted child that he or she is adopted? I think it's high time to have that conversation. It may be uncomfortable. I get it. It may be uncomfortable. But I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's a conversation that needs to happen now. It's not something we can put off anymore. The world has changed too. The way children think these days is different from the way we taught 20, 30, 40 years ago. The world has changed. So the child needs to know. I dare say it is the fundamental right of every adopted child to be told, oh, you were adopted. We loved you so much. We chose you. And you're a blessing to our family. So please, if you have an adopted child and you know somebody who has adopted, who hasn't told the child at all, please encourage them to do so. Encourage them to watch this video. It's scriptural. And when you don't tell the child, you are lying to the child. So to all intents and purposes, you're living in sin. Prayerfully talk to the child. Whatever it is that it's going to take, the child needs to know. And the time to do it is now, today, this minute. God bless you as you set the record straight in your family. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Have a good week. Bye-bye.